The sun was beginning to set over the dusty plains of Dry Creek, casting a golden glow on the weathered farmhouse that stood at the edge of town. Martha Dawson, a lonely widow, wiped the sweat from her brow and looked out over the small plot of land that had belonged to her late husband. The past 2 years since his passing had been hard crop failures, harsh winters, and mounting debts, but Martha was determined to keep the family farm alive for her son, Jacob. The house was quiet except for the crackling fire and the soft footsteps of Jacob, who was just 9 years old but already learning the tough lessons of life. His thin frame told the story of many days without enough to eat, and his big brown eyes always looked to Martha for hope. The two of them lived simply, and while neighbors were kind, most kept their distance. Worried about their own troubles in these hard times, one late afternoon, as Martha was gathering some wood, she noticed a figure riding slowly down the dusty road toward their farm. The man was tall, with a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes and a worn leather coat. His horse looked tired but steady. Martha instinctively tightened her grip on the bundle of kindling in her arms. As the man approached, he tipped his hat and smiled a warm, tired smile that seemed to hold stories of his own. "Evenin', ma'am," he said in a deep voice. "Name's Thomas Reed. I'm just passing through and thought I might stop for a meal, if you have any to spare." Martha hesitated. Food was scarce, but something in the man's eyes made her heart soften. "You're welcome to share what we have," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the small kitchen was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the faint aroma of herbs. Martha set a simple meal on the table, stew made from what little meat they had, fresh bread, and water. Jacob watched from the corner, curious but too shy to speak, as they ate. Thomas told stories of the road, of distant towns and wild landscapes. Martha found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. There was something about this man, strong, kind, and mysterious, that made the world seem a little less lonely. When the meal was finished, Thomas helped clean the dishes and offered to help with chores around the farm. Over the next few days, he worked alongside Martha and Jacob, repairing fences and tending to the small garden. His skills were evident, but he never spoke of his past or why he was traveling. Martha felt a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity. Who was this man who had appeared out of nowhere? And why did he stay when most others would have ridden on? That night, as Jacob drifted to sleep, Martha sat by the window, looking out at the stars. She thought about the future, the uncertain days ahead, the debts looming like dark clouds, and the stubborn hope that kept her going. Little did she know, the stranger she had welcomed was more than just a weary traveler. Thomas Reed was a man with a secret that, once revealed, would change Martha's life forever and save her beloved farm from ruin. Days passed quietly on Martha's farm, the rhythm of chores and simple meals weaving a comforting routine. Thomas Reed remained a steady presence, his quiet strength lifting the heavy burdens Martha had carried alone for so long. Jacob's eyes brightened with the return of laughter and the promise of hope. Yet, beneath the calm surface, Thomas carried a secret he dared not reveal. Every morning, before dawn, Thomas would rise and ride toward the distant hills. When he returned, his face was thoughtful, his gaze distant. Martha noticed his occasional pauses by the edge of the property, staring out at the horizon as if searching for something unseen. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Martha asked gently, "Thomas, what brings you to Dry Creek? Why stay here with us when you could be anywhere else?" Thomas looked into the flames, his voice low but steady. "I've seen a lot of places, Martha. But there's something about this land, something worth protecting." Martha nodded slowly, sensing there was more to his words. She glanced at Jacob, who was already half asleep on a blanket nearby, then back to Thomas. "If there's a reason you're here, you can trust me. We're good people, trying to hold on." Thomas hesitated, then sighed deeply. "I'm involved in building a railroad that will bring life and growth to towns like this, but there are powerful men who want to claim lands by force, who care more about money than the people who live here." Martha's heart quickened. The debts she feared, the looming threat of losing her home, they all felt closer, more real. "I'm here because this farm, your home, is important. I want to help you keep it," Thomas said quietly. Days turned to weeks, and the railroad project edged closer to Dry Creek. Thomas revealed more of his identity. He was no mere traveler but Thomas Reed, the man behind the construction of the railroad line that promised to connect the West to the rest of the country. His offer to help was genuine, but his presence also stirred trouble. Rival landowners and unscrupulous businessmen caught wind of the railroad's path and sought to claim lands ahead of the railroad's arrival. The peaceful life Martha hoped for seemed fragile, threatened by forces beyond her control. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a fence, he spotted a group of men riding toward the farm. Their faces were hard, eyes cold, and their intent clear. Martha gathered Jacob and stood by Thomas, ready to defend what was theirs. The men demanded the land, claiming to have bought it from someone claiming to be the rightful owner. Thomas stepped forward, calm but firm. "This land belongs to Martha Dawson. Any claim otherwise is false." The leader sneered. "We'll see what the courts say. This land is worth a fortune once the railroad comes through." Thomas met the man's gaze with unwavering resolve. "I'll make sure the truth comes out." That night, Martha sat by the window, watching the stars. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. With Thomas Reed by their side, perhaps their story would not end in loss, but in new beginnings. The days that followed the confrontation with the land claimants were tense. Martha felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her, but Thomas's presence gave her a renewed sense of strength. He was no longer just a mysterious traveler, he was a man who had chosen to stand with her, and that mattered more than words could say. Thomas spent long hours in town, meeting with local officials and railroad engineers, working to ensure the project moved forward smoothly. Martha admired his dedication. But what she noticed most was the kindness in how he treated Jacob, who had quickly taken to the man's quiet confidence. One afternoon, Jacob asked Thomas, "Will the railroad really help us, sir?" Thomas smiled, ruffling the boy's hair gently. "It will, Jacob. It will bring new opportunities, new friends, and a chance for this town to grow. Your mom's farm will be part of something bigger, future." Jacob's eyes sparkled with hope. For the first time, the future didn't seem so scary. Meanwhile, Martha and Thomas worked side by side on the farm, preparing the land for the coming change. They fixed fences, cleared fields, and planted seeds, both literal and metaphorical. Martha shared stories of her late husband, her struggles, and her dreams, while Thomas listened, offering quiet encouragement. But danger lingered in the shadows. The rival landowners were not deterred. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas received a warning from a trusted friend. A discreet note slipped into his hand in town. It said that more than words were coming. That force might be the next move from those who wanted the land. Thomas showed the note to Martha, who felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "We have to be ready," Thomas said. Martha nodded, her determination fierce. "This farm is all we have left. I won't lose it." Together, they organized the neighbors, rallying support from the small community that understood the importance of standing together. The local sheriff promised to keep an eye out, and the townspeople offered what help they could. One night, as a storm rolled in, the rival men tried to sneak onto the farm, hoping to intimidate Martha and Thomas into giving up, but the community was ready. Lights flashed in windows, dogs barked, and the men found themselves surrounded by neighbors standing firm. Faced with unexpected resistance, the men retreated, their threats no longer as bold. The victory was small, but significant, a sign that the people of Dry Creek would not be pushed aside. In the quiet aftermath, Martha felt her hope grow stronger. The farm, the town, and her family had a chance to survive and thrive. Thomas looked out at the dark sky, the first stars breaking through the clouds. "This land means more than money," he said softly. "It means home." Martha smiled, grateful not just for Thomas's help, but for the reminder that sometimes, the strongest fences are built with trust and friendship. Spring was blossoming in Dry Creek, and with it came a renewed sense of possibility. The railroad project was gaining momentum, and the townspeople, once wary and uncertain, began to imagine a brighter future. The air buzzed with the sounds of construction hammers striking, rails being laid, and the rhythmic clatter of progress echoing through the valley. Martha felt a lightness she hadn't known in months. The farm was beginning to flourish again, and Jacob's laughter filled the fields where once there was only silence. Thomas's presence remained a steady anchor, his quiet support helping to heal old wounds and inspire new dreams. One afternoon, as Martha and Thomas worked side by side planting seeds in the garden, Thomas shared more about the railroad's promise. "This line will connect towns like Dry Creek to cities far beyond. Goods will flow, people will travel, and new businesses will grow. It's not just a track, it's a lifeline." Martha nodded, imagining the possibilities. "Maybe," Jacob will have a future here, one that isn't filled with struggle and worry. Jacob, nearby, paused his play to listen, hope shining in his eyes. But progress was not without its challenges. The rival landowners had not given up, and their attempts to undermine the railroad's path grew bolder. One morning, Martha discovered several tools missing from the barn, and a fence had been cut in several places. Thomas inspected the damage, his expression grim. "They're trying to scare us off." Martha's resolve hardened. "We'll stand firm. This land is ours." Word spread through the town, and support grew. Local farmers, shopkeepers, and families rallied together, determined to protect their homes and future. The sheriff increased patrols, and the community kept a watchful eye through the long nights. One evening, as Thomas and Martha sat on the porch, the distant sound of a train whistle drifted on the breeze. It was a small, early locomotive arriving to test the new rails, but to Martha, it was a powerful symbol, proof that change was coming. Soon, Thomas said softly, "Dry Creek will be part of something bigger." Martha smiled, her heart full, "And we'll be ready." The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The railroad workers laid tracks through the town, bringing new faces and opportunities. A small depot was built near Martha's farm, promising easier access to goods and travel. Jacob made new friends, and Martha found herself involved in town meetings, her voice growing stronger as she spoke for the community. Thomas continued to support the railroad's expansion, but he never lost sight of the farm and family that had become his own. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Thomas handed Martha a letter. It was an official document confirming that the land title was secure, her farm was protected, free from the claims of rival landowners. Tears welled in Martha's eyes. "Thank you, Thomas. You saved more than this land, you saved our hope." Thomas smiled, a quiet pride in his eyes. "No, Martha, you saved yourselves. I only helped." As the train rolled into Dry Creek, carrying new opportunities and fresh promise, Martha, Jacob, and Thomas stood together, ready to face whatever the future held. The lonely widow, the starving cowboy's son, and the railroad baron were no longer strangers. They were a family, bound by hope and the unbreakable spirit of the West. With the railroad now passing through Dry Creek, the town began to change. New shops opened, farmers had better access to markets, and a fresh wave of hope stirred the hearts of its people. For Martha and Jacob, life felt like it was finally turning a corner. Thomas Reed remained a steady presence, balancing his responsibilities with the railroad and his growing connection to Martha and Jacob. The once lonely widow found herself sharing laughter and quiet moments she hadn't known in years. One morning, as Thomas and Martha worked together in the fields, Jacob approached with a worried look. "Mama," he said softly, "there's a man asking questions about the farm. He looks unfriendly." Martha's smile faded. The past wasn't quite ready to let go. That afternoon, a tall man in a dark coat rode into their yard. His eyes were sharp, his demeanor cold. "I'm here on behalf of the old owners," he said bluntly. "This land isn't yours, Mrs. Dawson. I suggest you reconsider." Thomas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This land is legally yours. We've settled that." The man sneered. "The law isn't always what it seems, Mr. Reed." Martha stood beside Thomas, her heart steady. "We've faced worse than threats, and we won't be driven away." The man's eyes flicked to Jacob, then back to Martha. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode off, leaving a chill in the air. That night, Martha sat by the fire, her thoughts heavy. Thomas joined her, offering quiet comfort. "He won't give up easily," Thomas admitted, "but neither will we." Days passed, and the man's visits became more frequent, each time testing their resolve. But the community, strengthened by the railroad and their own determination, stood firmly behind Martha. One afternoon, Jacob found Thomas teaching him how to ride a horse. "You're a fast learner," Thomas said with a smile. Jacob beamed. "I want to be strong, like you." Thomas ruffled his hair. "You already are." Martha watched them, her heart full of gratitude. Despite the challenges, she knew they were building more than a farm. They were building a family. As the railroad continued to grow, so did the ties that bound them. Thomas's secret, once a heavy burden, now felt lighter in the warmth of their trust. And though the shadows of the past still lingered, Martha, Jacob, and Thomas faced the future together, stronger, hopeful, and ready for whatever lay ahead. As summer warmed the fields of Dry Creek, the town thrived under the promise of the railroad. Martha's farm blossomed alongside the community's growth, each new day bringing fresh hope. Yet beneath the surface of progress, old wounds simmered, and the threats against the farm remained. One afternoon, Thomas gathered the neighbors in the small town hall. The room buzzed with concern as they discussed the recent visits from the mysterious man who claimed rights to Martha's land. "We stand together," Thomas declared, his voice steady and commanding. "No one will take what belongs to this community." Martha watched as the townspeople nodded, their faces a mix of determination and relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt the strength of unity around her. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas and Martha walked along the newly laid railroad tracks. The sound of a distant train whistle echoed through the valley, a reminder that change was unstoppable. "We've come a long way," Martha said softly. Thomas smiled, "And there's still farther to go, but we face it together." Jacob joined them, his youthful enthusiasm lighting their way. "I can't wait to see where the train goes next," he said with a grin. Thomas knelt beside him. "And I can't wait to see where life takes you, son." But just as peace seemed within reach, trouble arrived in the form of a storm, both literal and figurative. A fierce thunderstorm swept through Dry Creek, threatening crops and homes. The railroad tracks were damaged, and the town's future suddenly felt fragile again. Without hesitation, Thomas organized a group to repair the damage, working side by side with Martha, Jacob, and their neighbors. Their combined effort and determination repaired not just the tracks but the spirit of the community. In the quiet moments after the storm, Martha looked around at the faces of those she had come to call family. The hardships had tested them, but they had emerged stronger. Thomas took her hand gently. "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." And with the sun rising over Dry Creek once more, hope was no longer just a dream. It was a promise. The early morning sun spilled golden light across the fields of Dry Creek, bathing the town and farm in warmth and promise. The railroad had become more than just tracks and trains. It was a symbol of a new era, a bridge between the past and the future. Martha stood on the porch, Jacob by her side, watching the first train pull steadily into the newly completed station. The whistle's call was a joyful sound, echoing hope through the valley. Thomas approached, his face lit with a gentle smile and eyes full of pride. "We did it," he said softly. "Together," Martha nodded, tears welling. "You saved more than our land, Thomas. You saved our lives." Thomas shook his head humbly. "No, Martha. It was your strength and the town's spirit. I was just the one lucky enough to stand with you." Jacob tugged Thomas's sleeve. "What comes next?" Thomas looked down at the boy, then up at the growing town. "Next is all about building dream schools, businesses, families. This land will grow because of you and those who came before." As the train slowly came to a stop, townspeople gathered to greet it, their faces bright with excitement and hope. New opportunities awaited jobs, visitors, supplies, and a future that once seemed impossible. Martha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders. The lonely days were behind her. Ahead lay friendship, family, and a life filled with promise. Thomas, Martha, and Jacob stood side by side, no longer strangers but a family bound by trust, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of the West. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on the land they loved, one thing was certain: together, they could face anything the future held.